Yeah, very excited for what I have to show you. I'm going to focus on the data stuff because that's clearly the kind of stuff that you're doing in school. So, and I'll show you some concepts that you're familiar with. I'm sure some concepts that you might not be familiar with as well. So, welcome to this presentation on Cambodia's COVID stats. So, 6 things I'm gonna go through: the vaccination progress, and the vaccine supply that's been given, comparing Cambodia to other countries, why did the lockdown happen when it did, and looking at rankings of Cambodia and other countries in the world, and then what might happen in future. So, kicking off with vaccines given. So there are 2 stages that need to be taken in any country to kind of deal with COVID-19. Firstly, it's to mitigate as much as we can, and then it's to vaccinate later on. So the ultimate goal is that enough people in the population are vaccinated that COVID-19 goes away. But before we do that, we need to do whatever we can to make sure that people don't suffer in the meantime. So looking at vaccination, 6.2% of the population to date, as of last night, is now fully vaccinated in Cambodia, which is pretty impressive actually, because this means that Cambodia ends up ranking 3rd in Asia, which is very impressive. I am at this stage excluding Middle Eastern countries from Asia. They're technically part of Asia, but it's a whole different kind of landscape from what this is. So this is what's quite impressive, and from a sort of data standpoint, this is all I'm going to share with you of the vaccine supply, because 2 reasons. Number one, I want to give you as little information as possible that your brain is not cluttered, and you will remember this because I've given you 1 fact. There are 16 other facts that I could have given you, but in essence, my analysis has come to this number, which I think is the most important one. And then I'm taking the number in context and giving you the ranking as well to show you how that compares to other things. So if you're working with World Bank data, then comparisons and rankings that we'll cover more later are also very important. Looking at vaccine supply. So there are currently 4 million vaccines in country right now. I should say M, not K, sorry. And this is roughly when they've received them. This side note, this kind of chart, this is something called a waterfall chart. I really like it because what it does is it shows you every progressive stage, and then you can create a total amount over here as well that goes to the full amount at the end. So it's doable within Excel or PowerPoint. It's in the Insert tab in Charts. You have this thing called a waterfall chart. So I really like them. It's really good for showing the change between one point in time and a later point in time. And it can show up and down trends as well quite well. Cambodia ends up ranking in the top 10 globally in terms of percent of people who have received the 2nd dose divided by percent that received the 1st dose. Again, this is kind of after I've done all my analysis, this is my takeaway point. So this is why I've put it here. There are 4 million vaccines in country, but they are split between Sinopharm is 42%, Sinovac is 50%, and AstraZeneca, the Western vaccine, is only 8%. The WHO is expected to authorize Sinovac and Sinopharm later this week, so we're all really hoping for that, because that would be a huge push in terms of progress with COVID vaccinations, not just in Cambodia, but all over the world. But the protection only comes a little bit after the 2nd dose. So comparison versus other countries. So this is an interesting visual where Cambodia is in the red lines and all these kind of gray lines are other countries. This is the number of cases per day. You may have seen these charts looking at COVID. I've kind of simplified and taken out a lot of the detail out of it, just so people can compare the trajectory of Cambodia versus other places. And this is normalizing it to the days after they reached 100 cases. So something that's used quite a lot. And then after 30 days, so the UK, France, and Germany, the European countries, had this number of cases, whereas Cambodia has had about 1/20th of those of UK even. So it is kind of emphasizing that as bad as things are here, fortunately they're nowhere near as growing as fast as they have been in other places. So a little bit about the timing of when restrictions happened. So moving averages, I can't remember, Jade, if you talked about saying that you're doing moving averages. I find moving averages very, very useful. What a moving average is, it just means that it takes the last 7 days and finds the average of those and moves them along. Because you end up normalizing and getting kind of, you don't get erratic up, down like this. You get more kind of straight lines and increased trends. So we can see that for the first for almost 2 months of the outbreak, Cambodia's rate was essentially just a straight line, more or less, a little bit curvy and wavy, but it was very, very straight line. And then it really increased around the 7th of April. These are the number of cases going up by the dates going across. Nationwide is blue, Phnom Penh is green. And cumulative cases, so this is how it looked. So again, you can see that it's very, very little until around the 7th of April, and then it really shot up in both instances. And we created kind of a step change where the gradient, I'm not sure if you've done that yet in maths, but the gradient is the sort of slope that was quite low, and then it increased here, and then it increased again. So there have been two kind of step changes along the way. And if we compare the points in time where Cambodia, Phnom Penh introduced curfews and lockdowns, we can see that they are somewhat related. Cambodia has fortunately been ahead of predicting when it would go up. So probably putting these in a few days before the change in slope has made the change in slope lower than it could have been. The positivity rate is increasing though, and that is something a little bit more advanced. Looking at rankings, Cambodia is currently the 23rd lowest country in the world in terms of cases per million. It is going down. It used to be 4th lowest before the outbreak. And I get this data from a site called Worldometer, which I really like. But I make a lot of assumptions before I do this. For example, if we look at the list of where it says, well, country other here, the first two are not actually countries, they're cruise ships. We have places like Western Sahara, which is not a country, it's more of a territory, and Macau as well is not a country. So I'm excluding a lot of places before I'm able to come up with these rankings, like number 23. So the things that I exclude, and this is quite important when you do any kind of data analysis, that you make assumptions. And in this case, I've excluded everything that's not a country, any place with less than 100 cases, with a population of less than 1 million, and any place that's not reporting tests regularly and accurately. So then I look at country comparison. So Cambodia is actually 140 times lower in terms of cases per population than USA at the moment, which is pretty impressive. And lastly, advice on what could happen in future. So this I find really interesting, looking at the outbreak that we've seen in Cambodia with 2 other outbreaks that are happening right now in Laos and Thailand. So I'm saying that day 0 is the first day that they received cases. And as you can see, Thailand is really, really shooting up a lot faster than the other 2. Laos is higher than Cambodia, but not too much higher. Laos locked down very, very fast. But this is something that I thought was very interesting. Looking at it broken down by provinces, so you can create map charts, which I really like doing. So outside of Phnom Penh, the 4 kind of localized outbreaks we've seen are in Sihanoukville, and then very small kind of towns on the border, one in Khao Thom in Kandal, one in Bavet, and one in Poi Phet up here near Thailand. Again, another trick, you can make map charts in Excel and PowerPoint. You go to the Insert tab, you have map charts here. A lot of people don't know they exist. They're really, really useful, and I use them all the time. In terms of what I publish, I always try and publish this. So as Jade knows, he's seen my posts on Twitter, and I always try and make this kind of map chart where you can see what's going on, along with some of the other charts that I've shown you as well. So yeah, Cambodia's other provinces seem not to be growing in terms of COVID cases, and that's a really positive thing. When we use the word positive, that's a really good thing. It's a little bit technical, maybe I'll skip this. The R0 is the infectious rate. How many people are expected to get COVID? It's between 1.5% and 3.5%. And the death rate is around between 1 and 5% from what we know. Another useful statistic that you would get from World Bank as well is the urbanization rate. The population, the percentage of population that is urbanized. Cambodia's is very, very, very low. It's only 24%. Even Thailand is more than double. It's 49%. If there's low urbanization, then scientists are pretty sure that that means that COVID is going to be transmitted at a lower rate. And now just end up with some cool stuff that I've made. So this is Power BI. It's an application that I use for my job, and I've made this. I do these for customers, companies. But what I've made is this kind of tool where you can say you want to see any one of these metrics. So the number of deaths, the highest number of deaths or deaths per million, and I can see the ranking, and I can also filter here. So let's say I want to see the 50 countries that are performing the best. I can click 50 lowest to highest, and here they are, and then I can see where they are on the map as well. But let's say I want to see that for cases. I can click on cases instead of deaths. So this is a tool that I've built. You can actually access the tool yourselves. It's on my company website. I can even show you over here. So yeah, so it's a really interesting thing, and this has allowed me to make a lot of very cool viewpoints about COVID. So here, filter ranked countries. This is the same tool that I showed you, where you can click around and do things with it. It really shows me actually that if you look at the cases per million, it's probably the most important metric. If we look at the top 50, we see that all of the European countries are here, 0 countries in Africa, and almost nothing in Asia. Americas is decently high as well, fairly high in South America. And then if I look at lowest to highest, I can see that the opposite is true. I get all of the African countries, particularly the ones in the middle of Africa, and then I get all the ones down here in Asia and Australia as well. And the conclusion that I have about this is that COVID seems to very much be related somewhat to how close places are to the equator, to the middle of the world. Even the southern parts of Africa and the northern parts of Africa don't fall into this. It's just really the central part of Africa, the sort of equatorial side of Asia as well. And there are definitely some other exceptions for sure, but this seems to be related from this analysis. All right, so that's the end of my presentation. I hope you found that useful. I realize it was probably a lot to take in, but I do have a YouTube video on my YouTube channel as well, if you want to check on that, which covers essentially this talk, but a little bit more. So I have a YouTube channel where I have lots of tech tutorials. There's me. So feel free to check out this video if you want to learn more about it as well.
Your thoughts on impact on the economy?
Yeah.
Some students, I know that you didn't go too deeply into how you've gleaned or siphoned the data because I thought that was really interesting about how you do it on a daily basis through the media source. But I'm sure that your video goes into that, or if you felt like you wanted to elaborate.
Yeah, I can for sure. So on the GDP and the employment rate, so those are really, really good questions. I'm sure it's definitely negatively impacted it. It's difficult to really get that much data on it because there's always a delay. You know, where if lockdown happens on Tuesday, then the cases will rise. You'll be able to see that much more real time. But the impact on GDP normally takes a couple of months, sometimes even a couple of years to become apparent. So it's very difficult to ascertain that. There are projections, but it's not something that I've kind of looked into in that much detail. European comparisons versus Asian comparisons. So that's a really good point. Does the data show lockdowns are effective? So yeah, what I do is, I guess I can share my screen. Yeah, I found some really useful resources actually recently. So believe it or not, Wikipedia has a fantastic page on COVID in Cambodia that's really kept up to date. So over here, it's even got the number of vaccinations. This was updated. It hasn't got yesterday's numbers, but it's as of 4th of May. So, well, last night's numbers. So it hasn't got today's numbers essentially. Yeah, this is a really good source of information. It has a lot of breakdowns. And I've also found that the Bing homepage has some really cool stuff. So Bing, Cambodia COVID. No, so Bing is like the Microsoft version of Google. Yeah, bing.com. And if I go to Cambodia COVID, and I go to statistics, I can see all of this stuff that it does. It's got some cool animations, deaths, vaccinations every day. This is pretty impressive. And then you can even do a country comparison by region. This is very cool. The chart that I showed you of the chart after 100 days, yeah, you can see that Cambodia is really, really low here. But that is also, yeah, it's really able to showcase. You can type any country you want to add into it as well. So this is something that I often look at. To get to the raw data, I use Fresh News, which is the government-affiliated Cambodian news site. I use Google Translate, so I have a Chrome extension, and I translate it. It's Google Translate is so cool. And let me go to the data about vaccines that I showed you, this one. So total of this number of vaccines, and then I just keep using Google Translate, and then I get the data here. I have a whole host of data sources. Worldometer is another one that I mentioned.
So are you taking these data sources and then taking an average, and then which numbers do you usually post through your channels?
Well, I take the ones that come from the news sites because those are the most up to date. Stuff like Wikipedia and Bing is great, but they're normally 1 or 2 days behind schedule. So I have a whole, this is my kind of library of sites that I take to use. The CDC homepage, for example, has the testing numbers, again, using Translate. Fresh News is for the vaccine numbers. I use CNE or Chinese news sites as well for the case numbers by province here. So this is the CDC Facebook page, and I can see the total number of tests. Here's what's interesting. They only give you the total number to date. So I would copy that, put it in a spreadsheet where I have test numbers, and then, yeah, and then I just do today minus yesterday every time, calculate positivity rates and other things as well here.
Okay. Yeah, that's extremely interesting.
I love Excel, so I'm really, I use a lot of very advanced Excel features. For example, Power Query over here. Very, very little used tool, but it's, when I started using this 5 years ago, it changed my life. No joke. So yeah, data transformation tool to be able to combine and compile data sources is a very, very great thing that you can do.
So thank you very, very much for your time.
Yeah.
No problem. Oh, there is one question here.
Where'd that go?
It's in the chat.
No, he says, according to your research, how much longer could it be going on in Cambodia?
Okay, so that's a very big question. My own personal take is that the vaccines are going very, very fast here, and they plan to vaccinate Phnom Penh by the end of June. If I couple that with the evidence that we've seen so far of like outside of Phnom Penh, COVID not really taking off, potentially by like late July, we might be able to do it. But there's a lot of ifs. There's new variants. There's the reliability of the vaccines, running out of vaccines, whether herd immunity can be reached with a young population. So, but yeah.
We keep it to a half hour. You seem like you have a very busy day today. So from ISPP and the grade 8s, we would really like to say thank you for your time and your insights.
No problem. And yeah, final thought to all the students, like I really love maths. Maths was my favorite subject in school. So I'm happy to hear that you guys are doing like histograms and regressions and things. I'm kind of jealous because I miss learning about all that stuff.